will skip this. Why vulture? You see very nice birds just before. Okay, I will try to convince you that these birds are as lovely as the barn owl. Hard to tell like this, huh? But okay, they are strict scavengers, very obligate scavengers. They only eat dead animals. So they're not like the barn owl, which is all the killing object in its own. No, it has only a specialized adaptation and morphological adaptation just to eat dead animals. So first, it cannot kill. His feet, unlike most raptors, it doesn't have talons. It doesn't have sharp claws to kill anything. So it's just like a chicken feet, actually. But the beak is very sharp. It can cut the leather of a cow very easily. It has a very powerful neck, very flexible. A rough, because it's a very clean bird. You can't imagine it, but it doesn't like to be dirty. Also because, so all the dirty matters, and when it's feeding, it doesn't want it to be to get dirty on the body and the plumage, because the plumage is their apparatus to fly. So that's their safety equipment. Also, they are very strong, very acid digestive juice to eliminate all microbes, and so they avoid propagation of diseases, and they can fast for more than 2 weeks. Also, many behavioral adaptations, that's more interesting to me. The behavior of the bird, I mostly work on behavioral ecology. And so they find ways to find food resources that are completely unpredictable in time and space. So they have to travel long distance daily, they must save energy, and especially using some special flight, I would say, and they are very social birds. They like to be in groups all the time. They need to be in groups to find food and also to share food, because the food is big enough. When it's a cow to feed, it's plenty of food for many birds. Start my stopwatch. I can speak for 3 hours on vultures. I will avoid to do it. So how are they efficient? This is a series of photos I like very much, taken by a friend in the Grand Cause. So a dead animal found, deposited in the morning at 10 o'clock, 10:10, first vulture arrive. 5 minutes later, there are kind of 6 or 7. A few minutes later, you don't see anything. It's only a pile of feathers and shouting and so on. And 30 minutes after, that's it. Everything's gone. This poor black kite has almost nothing to do. They are highly efficient, very efficient, and sometimes they are maybe too efficient to some people that understand they don't kill animals. So they are very important ecologically because they are recyclers. They recycle the nutrients and they avoid to propagate diseases like all the anthrax or any kind of disease that animals can get. But also they are weakened by their behavior. First, their foraging behaviors. They travel a lot, I will show you after. But also they feed in groups, and then they can be also poisoned in group. One poisoned animal, one poisoned carcass can kill tens or hundreds of vultures, like here in Africa. And they also, because they are the top of the trophic chain, they accumulate all the pollutants. So if there are pollutants like lead in ammunition, for instance, it can kill vultures. Slowly, but clearly. And also, with the locomotion, with their flights, they can collide with a human-made obstacle, you will see later. And they are weakened by their demography. They are a bit like the barn owl, a bit like men. They are very slow pace of life. Late maturity, 4 years to be adult. 1 or 2 chicks per year. 2 chicks only for the one species. Otherwise, only 1 chick per year. But they have a very long life expectancy. They survive easily 20, 30 years. And so demographically, they are very sensitive to any decrease in adult survival. If you kill an adult, it will have long-term consequences on the population. Situation in Europe, not good. Declining everywhere, well, especially here, unfortunately, of course, in Israel, but also anywhere. The only good signs are in Spain, France, a bit in Italy, a bit in Bulgaria, but otherwise it's not very good. Mostly by destruction, poison, now wind farms, we'll speak about it later. In the world, how is it? It's even worse. The largest population used to be in India. It's a huge decline in India, now a decline in Africa, decline everywhere. In India, it has declined from almost 90%, 95% within 10 years. India used to be like this. Vultures absolutely everywhere, in city, in Mumbai, in Calcutta, everywhere. Vultures everywhere. And then suddenly, they disappeared, nobody understood. Suddenly, there were less than 10,000 individuals, decline of 97% in 10 years. they searched for it, and find it. Finally, it was a poisoning, but not volunteer. It's a poisoning by medicine given to the livestock, diclofenac. So, but for them, if you lose 95% of the vultures, you lose also all the service they provide to get rid of the animals. So then lots of other animals take profit of it, especially rats and feral dogs, and they bring disease like rabies and other kind of disease. And one study evaluated the cost of this decline of vultures on human health and economy, about $34 billion on the society in India, just to lose vultures. So, and not good in India, not good in Africa as well. They are all declining very strongly currently. And now they are considered as the most threatened group of birds in the world by the IUCN. Okay, let's go back to France, where I'm from. We have 4 species of vulture. Now we have 4 again, but it was not the case in any time. So who are we talking about? First, the griffon vulture, the most common one. We also have it in Israel. So it's a large bird, mostly brown with dark flight feathers, and only lives in the south. All the species I will talk about are in the south of the country, mostly in the Pyrenees, Alps, and in the Massif Central here. Other species is the black vulture. It's about the same size, slightly larger, slightly lighter, and dark brown. Bearded vulture is the same size as well, very large bird, but lighter, more slender bird, and a little beard here. And they're able to eat bones, you will see. And the Egyptian vulture, much smaller, still a big bird, but smaller than the other. It's a migrant bird going to Africa in winter, and it's quite common here still. And okay, what are they doing, these guys? The first to arrive on the dead animals is the griffon vulture. It's really the cleaner of everything. He's specialized in eating soft tissues, so the muscles, the viscera, and he arrives in big numbers. Then the second to arrive are the black vulture. They are eating on the tough tissues, the skin, the hairs, the tendons, the cartilagus, anything that is tough. Then the Egyptian vulture comes and takes the remains, pick up the remains all around. And the last to come is the bearded vulture. He is specialized in bones. And the small bones, he eats them directly, and the big bones, he takes them in the sky, breaks them on a rock, and eats the smaller birds. So after these 4 guys have passed, there is nothing left of a dead animal. But the situation in the world, so I tell you, is not very good. For the griffon vulture, it's the least concern in the world, but only 21,000 pairs in Europe, mostly in Spain, more than 1,000 in France. Bearded vulture, it's least concern because of the high population in Himalayas, but here it's declining everywhere. And only 200 pairs in Europe, it's endangered. Egyptian vulture, it's endangered everywhere in the range and declining strongly in Europe. And the black vulture, it's also near threatened, only 37 pairs in France yet. So why did they disappear? I tell it briefly, but it's mostly done by shooting, like these photos in the beginning of the 20th century. You see these guys from the cities here, and they shoot, and they hire the countrymen to carry their quarry. Also poison, change in agriculture, and change in sanitary regulation. I will talk about it later on. So it was forbidden to leave carcasses in the field like it was in former times. So they disappeared in the years 1940, except a very small population here in the Pyrenees. So in the 1960s, the griffons were mostly based in Spain, and a bit here, and a bit in Sardinia, and they disappeared from everywhere else. Only 50 pairs in France at most. Black vulture, it was extinct in France, extinct everywhere except in Spain. Bearded vulture, it was only remaining in the Pyrenees, 30 to 40 pairs, mostly in the Spanish side, and a few pairs in Corsica, and extinct everywhere else. And the Egyptian vulture, it was not that bad. It was about 200 pairs in France at that time, and mostly in the south, as I said. So now we'll talk about the reintroduction and the action we did for vultures. 50 years of action, the reintroduction and the supplementary feeding mostly. That's the big main issues for these guys. So the last population was here, in the Western Pyrenees, in the Osso Valley, and especially in this cliff here, these 2 cliffs. Only 10 pairs were remaining there in the 1960s. It was the last native population. So the first action for these birds was to provide food with a supplementary feeding and a legal protection to create a reserve not to disturb them anymore. and to educate the public, like this very old leaflet for in Basque language. It's not French. It's impossible for me to understand this. It's Basque. So to say the guys, don't drop your animals to the cave, give it to the vultures. So it succeeded. Finally, now we have more than 800 pairs in the Pyrenees in 2015, more or less. It's hard to count now. There are too numerous, maybe, very numerous at least. But elsewhere, they disappeared. So the first action was to reintroduce them in the Grand Causse. I will talk about the Grand Causse, that this area in the south of the Massif Central. Massif Central is a medium mountain, 1,500 meters elevation. This is the Alps, and this is the Pyrenees, for those who are not familiar. So two sites, mostly the Gorge de la Jonte here between 81 and 96, and also another site close by. And then in the Alps, from 1996 onwards. So what do we need to have vultures? We need generators of rising air currents. So this is relief and sun, because when they fly, they use soaring flight. They really don't like to flap. They like to glide only. So they can use thermal soaring, that is the air, that the sun is warming the air here, that creates a bubble of hot air that goes up. And the trick for the birds is to go into these thermals and go up like this. Or they can also use, when there is no sun, they can use the wind that goes on next to a slope, to a mountain that goes up, and this makes an area where it's possible to go up. They need also cliff, especially limestone cliff, that are very good for them, for nesting colonies. They like to live in cliff, most of them. And the breeding cycle is also quite special, I have to tell it. They start to lay their eggs in January, they hatch in April, the fledge is in July and August, and emancipation in October. So they are breeding almost all the year. Only 3 years off, and then they start again. And you need food. Food for them is dead animals, and mostly ungulate carcasses, which are the best food for them. In the area of the Grand Causse, we have like this type of semi-steppe areas, a bit like the Golan Heights that I visited 2 years ago, very similar, but much more sheep. It was more than 400,000 sheep and lamb, mostly for cheese, the famous Roquefort cheese, for those who know, and meat as well. And with 4% mortality in the herd in general, it's about 19,000 carcasses available. So potentially you can feed 1,000 vultures over there. So the first reintroduction was really a dream of naturalists, made by this bunch of guys, especially Michel Terrasse here. So in the summer 1970s, they released 4 vultures, but without much preparation, and it was a big failure. They all died or lost. So they said, we have to behave differently. And so they started to educate the people, so to sensibilize, to say to the public that vultures are not dangerous. Remember, they were there not so long ago, just 20, 30 years ago. So symbolization of the public, the farmers, the hunters, the politicians, and then also to accommodate the bird. And they started with these cages. It's not easy to see because they are well camouflaged. These cages was built for a captive colony that were there for 10 years. 10 years waiting, but 10 years for the birds to impregnate, to learn the landscape and to feel at home in this landscape. Most of these birds came from zoos and from the customs that take some captive birds and so on. So 10 pairs of birds, of vultures, were raised in this area. And when they considered it was ready, then they released it from 1981. And the trick was that they made the release in winter. That is very important for the story, because in summer, if you release in summer, the conditions for flying are too good. So they immediately go far away and they forget what they're doing and they go elsewhere. But in winter, the conditions are not that good, they cannot go far. And in addition, in December, especially at the time, they are reforming the pair. So and you remember, there was a captive colony, breeding colony here, so the birds know each other very well. And when they release the bird in winter, then these birds continue to stay together. And finally, a few months after the first release, the first egg was laid immediately, because one of these pairs continued its reproduction here in the wild, and the first chick was available, well, was fledged on the first year after the first release. So they released first adults and then later on immatures, and in total 60 birds released. And from the beginning, colleagues from the LPO and the National Park of the Cevennes started to ring a big ringing action. Probably now it's one of the best studied long-term study of griffon vultures in the world. We have this, all the chicks have been ringed since the beginning, and now it's about 50 chicks per year by these guys in the big cliff like this. And it's very informative, this. It's a long-term monitoring that gives you an idea of if everything is going well or not demographically. And first we can see that there was a cost of release, I would say, in demography. So the survival was a bit reduced in the first year after the release, but then everything was similar to the natural population. If they survive this first year after the release, to accommodate to wildlife, then they become normal. So juvenile is 60% survival, immature 85%, and adults it's 95% survival, very high, and 28 years of life expectancy. And so we see the fantastic growth of the population. We are now at about 600 pairs, 618 I think this year in the Grand Causse, and the same project similar project in the Pyrenees, in the Alps. Sorry, start very well as well. So for this population now we can say we are safe in France more or less, and it's a huge success. And so far there is no sign of stabilization. They continue to increase because they have a lot of food apparently. Black vulture. It completely disappeared from France, and the reintroduction started again in the Grand Causse. Once they finished with griffons, it started well, so they started the black vulture, and the Alps is ongoing since 2005, 2004 now. Same topic, so an aviary to accommodate the bird for a long time to know the landscape before release. But also they started a new technique that was based on falconry technique called hacking. So you raise the chicks, the chicks are born in captivity, in zoos, and then when they are a few weeks before fledging, they are put together in an artificial nest, here near to this cliff for instance, and they can fledge when they want. It's more natural, as they say. It worked well. Now we have 27 pairs in the Causse, 11 pairs in the Alps. They breed in trees, these guys, compared to the griffons. That's why we have this chick here in a big nest in a big tree, in a pine tree. We did the same kind of monitoring, intensive. All the chicks are marked in the trees. It's not that easy to go in these trees. And the same happened in the griffons. So the cost of release in the first year, and then the same survival in the wild and in the release bird. An interesting thing that the two techniques used for reintroducing the bird have the same consequences in survival. The hacking and the aviary technique have the same reward in the end. Third species to be reintroduced, the bearded vulture. So it was still alive in the Pyrenees, but not in the Alps. So there was a big project in the Alps, started in Austria in 1987, and then in other parks in Switzerland, in Italy, France, Mercantour, etc. Many chicks released, more than 200 now. These figures are a bit old. I couldn't find the new figures, but anyway. So 83 fledgling now are from the wild. So they released more than 200 birds immatures, and now they start to reproduce very well. Now we have 15 pairs in France this year. But it's not satisfying because this population in the Alps is doing quite well, but it continues to be not connected to the wild ones in the Pyrenees, and this one is quite saturated now. And there is no exchange, no movement between these two mountains, and it's not good for the genetic aspect, where they really need to have more fresh blood from the Pyrenees. So there was a new project launched in 2010 to reconnect the Alps with the Pyrenees, with two stepping stones here in the Grand Causse again and in the Préalpes of the Baronnie Vercors, because before they were mostly in this area. And so it's what we call the corridor bearded vulture to reconnect these two sites. So this started in the Grand Causse in 2012, 12 nestlings released by the hacking technique used in the Alps before. 4 birds are still present now, but it's a long process for the bearded vulture because it's only adult after 7 years. So we have to wait a long time, and there are many problems to solve before arriving to this stage. So we are far to success yet on this species in the coast. But encouraging sign, like this 2 first birds from 2012, one male, one female. So in the first year they were tracked by GPS. They stayed in this area for 1 year, and then one bird came to the Alps and the other bird to the Pyrenees. So the connection was done but now we need them to come back. But it's not a story yet. So it's encouraging. And the last species, Egyptian vulture, I won't talk a lot about him because unfortunately very few work is done on this one. We have 90 pairs currently, but it has declined quite a lot since the 1930s. It's stabilized, not really increasing, not good sign, and it's declining everywhere in the world. So the action was mostly to protect and monitor the pairs and to do some supplementary feeding. And this is the transition to the next big chapter of this talk, is about food. Food is very important for vultures. And normally, this is the type of landscape they used to have in the mountains, in the Pyrenees. So they have many wild animals, but also many livestock that are let free in the mountains. So when the animal is dead, it's dead here, and the vulture find it, and that's it. And it was legal to leave the dead animals in the mountains because no one would like to go with a truck to pick up a dead animal here, for instance. But in more flat landscape, like in the Grand Causse, which is a big limestone plateaus, as you can see behind, it was not allowed to leave the dead animals. So it has to be brought in a truck and go to a quartering plant 300 kilometers away to be burned, and like in the rest of the country. So in the first year after the reintroduction, the local managers, the national parks rangers, they established a network with the farmers around to collect some dead animals in their carcasses. They never killed any livestock for the vulture. It was only the animals that were dying naturally that were possibly given to the vulture instead of the quartering service. So the people came with a truck to pick up the dead animals and put it together in one or several sites, a big amount of carcasses. And like for example in '98, there was about 50 farmers that were participating regularly to this collective feeding station instead of going to the quartering service. So they were put in this place, for instance, and the vultures are very polite. They wait for the guy to come to put the food, and then they start to feed. And they can feed big numbers, commonly 200 birds that are feeding in this place. Yossi can remember and witness this site. But it was not very satisfying. And after lots of discussion with the state agencies, the minister and so on, the French state recognized that vultures are natural scavengers, natural quartering service. After 20 million years of action, the government says, okay, they can do the job maybe. So they changed the law and allowed the farmers who were willing to voluntarily ask for permit to have individual feeding stations. So this is like when the carcass is available, instead of calling the park rangers or the quartering service, they just put it in a specific place in their land, and they have a lot of land in this area. The space is large. And so they can provide a few carcasses each month. And it's very simple to build. It's just a fence, 100 meter to 100 meter, a little mark here to say it's where it is. And the fence is mostly to prevent the other sheep to come in. And the fox, well, does what he wants. I never tell something with the fox. So a few animals are put there every month. And we think it's a pretty good solution to manage vulture population. I'll try to convince you. Currently, we have more than 200, almost 200 supplementary feeding stations, mostly in the Grand Causse, but also in the Alps, in Ardèche, in the Aude, now in the Western Pyrenees, and some specific ones for bearded vulture in the red dots. That for the bearded vulture is mostly bones here and in Corsica, and so smaller carcasses for the Egyptian vulture in this area. But okay, is it natural? That's the big question, a big debate among conservationists of vultures. Does it change their foraging behavior to put food in supplementary way like we do, and does it affect their foraging behavior? And the risk is that become completely dependent towards human, like in these photos in Spain. We don't want that, not very much. So we did quite a lot of studies to understand the vulture behavior at this feeding station, and one of the many studies we did is really to understand their behavior when they are at this feeding station. And thanks to this large ringing scheme, we can monitor the individuals and tell who is dominant, who is not dominant, and so on. But I will show just one result here. we did some scan sampling. So every 10 minutes, we were looking at around each carcass the proportion of juvenile, immature, and adult birds, thanks to the color of the ruff and different topics here. And what we found is that this is the time it takes for the feeding event in minutes. So it is 1 hour, 60 minutes. And we compare the collective feeding station in black and the individual ones. And what was interesting is that the proportion of young birds is very low in the beginning, and then it starts to increase at the end of the feeding event. But the difference, the important thing is that in the individual feeding station at the farms, the proportion of young birds is much higher from the beginning compared to the collective feeding station, where it's almost only adult birds that are dominant on the ones. And if you look at the temporality of what happens, as I showed you in the first slide, the meat is gone in 20 minutes or so. So this is really when it pays to be at the feeding station. After, you only get the remains and you rip the skeleton, that's it. So it's hardly nothing to eat from this after 20 minutes. The good food is here. So it turns out that this smaller but numerous feeding station at farms, it gives a more chance for the young birds to access high quality food compared to this big feeding station collective where most of the food is taken by the adult breeders and not by the young birds that have no chance to access. So how do you access this, the movements? And we did a lot of tracking studies in the coast, in the Pyrenees and in the Alps, but I will mostly talk about the coast again. So the flight height is about 300 meters. They can fly very high, up to 2,500 meters above ground. I still don't know what they do at that altitude, but they can do it. The flight speed in average is quite low, 21 kilometers. But because they waste some time turning a lot. But in the maximum speed is 150 kilometers per hour almost. So they can be fast if they want. They travel a lot, in average 100 kilometers per day, a bit less for the immatures, and the maximum we got was about 360 kilometers in a foraging trip. It was not migration, just local movement. And they fly more in summer and spring than compared to winter, where the tracks are very short. We did the home range analysis, and this is the gray stuff. The gray shape is home range, and the darker it is, the more intensive is the use of this area. So there's a lot of variety between individuals. Like this one is 1,500 square kilometers, but the other bird is only 600 square kilometers. So the variation is between 300 to 3,000 square kilometers, their home range. But all the little dots here, these are feeding stations, and they visit all of them. All of them are included into the home range. If we put together all the home range, it turns something like this. So it's the global home range of the whole population, and it's about 10,000 square kilometers. It's a big area, very big. And in red is where most of the birds are going, but in gray, a few individuals are going. So we can have an idea of the intensity of the use of this area. And the next question was about does it change their behavior of movement, and do they display some type of stereotype behavior in their foraging? Like in this example here, this bird was nesting here in 3 different days. You see the tracks of the bird, and is visiting very often the same places. So the question is, do they always do the same thing every day? So is there a temporal routine? If you look at one feeding station, how many vultures will visit this particular feeding station and periodically, so every day or every 2 days? Well, to be short, the routine risk is very low, unless you are very close to the colonies, when they go very often, of course, then, because you are close to the colony, or close to a collective feeding site. Then it increases the chance for the feeding station to be visited very regularly and stereotypically. And especially, we look this time at the scale of the vulture. How many feeding stations are they visiting in an ordered sequence? Always the same, the site A and B and C, and the next day the site A and B and C and so on. Is it the same routine behavior? And again, we saw very low value of routine index. They don't really show regular movement. About 70% of the movement is different one day to another. So it looks like that it doesn't modify much the virtual behavior of this feeding station. These feeding stations are intensively used, but still there are a lot of favorable habitats around, like these steppe areas where they can easily find food, and so they use it as well, and to find dead animals that were not put to the feeding station yet because the farmer didn't find it. They are better at finding food than dead animals than the farmers often. And they don't display strong stereotype behavior. So the dependence to feeding station is not irreversible. They can find new areas very easily, and we have several examples where they find new places. If you look now from the farmer side, the benefit they can get and the society in general, what is the sanitary service provided by the vulture, the ecotoxicological risk, and so on, the local acceptance. So there was some surveys and questionnaires that were done with the farmers in this area, in the Grand Causse, in 2004. And most of them recognize the sanitary role of the vultures. They are doing a good job in getting rid of the carcasses. They understand that it prevents the transmission of disease. And also, so there is no shooting, no poison, and overall a good local acceptance. And for the economy, so it's not only the farmers that are happy, but also the local economy, because for instance, there was a museum for vulture created in 1998, 5 jobs, and it's about now, it was evaluated to be 1 or 2% of the tourist income of the region. I think now it's more about 5%. We are making a new study to give numbers on this. So vulture attract people finally, and so tourists come there not only for the Roquefort cheese or for the nice landscape, but also for the vulture, and it's really part of the public image. Now we can find the vulture almost everywhere. There are signs on the, like a house to rent here. This is a sign on the highway, so the UNESCO site is the vulture here. Even on beers, on the race, and everything is they put a vulture somewhere. So it really become again the image of the country. So if you look at the benefits of this feeding station, and especially the small feeding station at the farmers, it's for the vulture. It makes food widely spread and not so predictable. So it's more like a natural situation. But also it reduces competition and on the immatures and the young birds. They can access more food more easily. This reduces the risk of stereotype behavior, less dependence towards human. And if you look at the farmer side, so it's highly efficient quartering service. It's free. It works even on weekends, which is not the case as a truck. In summer they can wait for 3-4 days sometimes with a stinky carrion. So it limits the disease. And something important that was not evaluated in the beginning, the farmers then become implicated in the vulture management, and they become the ambassadors for vulture protection, not only the crazy naturalists and the ecologists, but also the farmers see a benefit on it. And for the society as well, you don't think about the society, but it makes reduction in pollution because you have less trucks on the road, less accident, less CO2 in the atmosphere. And it was evaluated with quite, in Spain they made some evaluation about the economy they did, and it's quite high. But I don't have the number here. And something I want to say that we tend to call it supplementary feeding station, but I think it's not the case anymore in this particular, and for the Griffon vulture in this area, it's really like natural recycling station, we should call it. It's not supplementary food because this sheep here behind, they belong to the landscape for 2,000, 3,000 years, and they manage the landscape, and so they live in the ecosystem, and the vulture are just the last part of the trophic chain. The sheep eat the grass dies someday, and the vulture recycles the nutriment, and the story starts again. And it was done since the antiquities. There was a Latin proverb saying "Ibi pecora, ibi vultures," so it means where there are herds, there are vultures. So it is really a restoration of the ancestral collaboration lasting for 3,000 years at least between the farmers and the vultures. So I think it's important to see it like this. It's not supplementary anymore. It's something that was existing for many thousands of years, and it's just a reestablishment of this type of relationships. A bit on movement. Look at my watch, okay. So the vulture in the Grand Coast, they mostly stay there. They don't move a lot. And all this movement that we see around is mostly the fact of juveniles that are going more into Spain, southern Spain, Catalonia, a bit in the Alps, but not much. We did some more tracking in the Alps, by the way. So I will show, we didn't really analyze the data, it's only 7 birds, but there are some interesting things. And the nice thing that this is all the tracks and the tracks of one bird here in blue. So he went one time in the coast, but most of the time they stay in this area in the Prealps. So he's breeding here and he's mostly feeding here in the Vercors. Lots of food over there and wildlife and so on. This is mostly in the whole year, but in summer they also go in the high mountains much more because the herds that are here come into the high mountains in summer. And they go in this type of landscape then. Quite different than what we are used to. And you see this famous mountain called La Meige, almost 4,000 meters. We had one bird passing here. You see the map here, exactly here. So they can manage in this high altitude also. It's quite unusual for you, I guess, with these glaciers, even for me. So it's they manage very well in the high mountains. In the Pyrenees, of course, there were natives there, so we did some tracking over there. Again, some surprises. The colony is here. And we thought they would go mostly in this area. And actually, they don't go a lot in this area, just next to their door. They prefer to go 70 kilometers, 100 kilometers to the west, to the Basque Country, in this type of mountains here, where there is a lot of food. And a lot of animals that are let free in the pastures all year round, especially in winter. So they like to go in the Western Pyrenees mostly. They don't go in the high mountains, strangely. And some birds, about 15% of them, they travel very far. And especially they love this place in Spain. And for those who know, that's the northern part of Andalusia and Extremadura. And they travel very often to this area because there's a lot of food again, a lot of dead animals in this area. We collaborate with the Spanish to understand better the use of this place. And one funny movement also, one immature that was equipped in the Pyrenees, instead of going there like the others in the Basque Country, he was mostly foraging in the east of the Pyrenees. And he spent his first summer here in the Alps. Come on. And so he was close to Italy, and he went back by all the colonies, by the Verdon, by the Baronnies, by the Grand Coast, by the Aude. He did everything. Other species, same pattern. The black vulture, I don't see many maps, but this one is very impressive. It speaks by itself. It was released here, and 2 months after, he went to Italy, Capri, back again, okay, the Alps, Vienne, back again, then the coast, then Spain, then he stayed there. So they are moving a lot. The bearded vulture, even worse. Look at this guy. It was released here, stayed 1 year here, then after his first year, he did one first trip here, and then come back, immediately went back again almost to Denmark. Then he went to the Northern Alps in Switzerland to see Alex. Then back to the Baronnie, 1 winter there, and then Belarusia, Ukraine, Romania, then we lost the track. Shit, maybe he's dead, we don't know. And back again here, actually. Now he's there. So they travel a lot. And beyond the restoration of the service and so on, sanitary service, finally, we did some good progress in the restoration of vulture network. This is not a real internet address. Don't search for it. Just so they really are connected now. At least the griffon and the black vulture for sure. Not the bearded vulture yet, but we hope. We hope that the bearded vulture will follow the griffons. So they are all connected. The Pyrenees, the coast, the Alps, the Central Alps. We are now waiting for this last bit. Italy is still remaining behind, but still from Spain and Africans, they travel a lot. So it's really a vulture highway in this area, and it is quite pleasant. I go fast in the current, so everything is not perfect. There's still some problems with power lines, the same as here. So it is still the first cause of mortality in France currently. To prevent this, we put like these candles here to prevent the bird to land on these power lines. Other problem with human disturbance, especially on the black vulture, on the nest on the trees, and also the bearded vulture, which is very sensitive. Wind farms is the next issue. It's increasing a lot, and I know you have some problems also soon here, unfortunately. In Spain, where they put a lot of wind farms everywhere. There have been 2,000 vultures found dead in 10 years only in Spain. This photo was taken in Spain. And now we have 20 projects of wind farms in the Grand Causse. This one was just built last year. It will be very problematic soon, I'm sure. So we did some modeling work to try to understand the collision risk of these vultures with a colleague from the CNRS. So it's first modeling the home range in 3 dimensions, modeling how they use thermal uplift, so the way they can gain altitude with the thermals, and to draw this type of graph. So it makes the collision risk is the risk to fly below 200 meters, and it's really correlated to the potential uplift potential. So the thermal uplift potential, sorry. So it means that here you have good sunshine or good wind, so the vulture can soar very easily, and then they fly high, they are not in trouble. But in the morning or when there is not so much sunshine, then they have trouble to find high elevation flight, so the risk is much higher. So with this work, we try to do some maps to inform the local managers of the national park here to see what are the worst place to put a wind farm. And so the red spot is close to the colonies where they go very often, so all those 4 species, so we can give a mark to each town or city to say that please don't put a wind farm here, and better to put it here where the risk is much lower. Well, fortunately it was on a paper, but now they just built a wind farm here, so it will be difficult. Anyway, so at a larger scale, this is the same type of home range of all the species that we are currently tracking. We depend on the GPS tracking data to draw this map. And in the Alps, it's quite okay. The blue dots are the wind farms actually running. And so the Alps, they are still safe, even though there are some projects here. The Ardèche, okay, but the Grand Causse, you see, here, this is national park. It's not possible to put a wind farm, but this area is really problematic, and it should become a big problem. And finally, because I'm still a researcher, I did a few research on it, I will present a few stuff on what we are doing. And I know there are many people from the Air Force and the pilots here, so I realized very quickly when I started to work on vulture that if you look at vulture, you have to understand what flight is about. And so we first have a look at the energy spent in flight, the influence of the weather and the landscape in the soaring gliding abilities. And what I was really keen to do is to understand the energetics, how much energy they spend to fly in different conditions. But this is very hard to do in nature, because to do this, most of the time we do it with heart rate recorder, but it's very hard to make in the wild. So we looked at the falconers that have Griffon vultures, and especially at this site in Rocamadour. It's here, and it's a nice natural canyon, and there is a falconry park on top of it, where the birds are trained just to fly naturally in the park. And the good thing with these raptors that they are tolerant to handling. They are captive bred, so they are used to their trainers. They are easy to measure, easy to recapture, and they do 3 to 6 flights per day. So we put a special GPS, very high resolution GPS, with a 3D accelerometer to record all the wing beats and the posture, together with the electrocardiogram to measure the heart rate, and we let the bird go. And it was very interesting to see. The bird starts here. When it's on the ground, it's 81 beats per minute in average. It's about similar, same as us. But when it starts, the big dots is when they flap. So they flap only in this beat. You see? And it's 260 beats per minute. So it's 4 times increase in the heart rate just for the start. Very, very high energy expenditure. But then they find the thermal, it decreases very quickly, 110 beats per minute. And when they are high there, hey look, it's the same. 81 beats per minute only. When they are high there, they travel for free. Once they have started, after the big effort to take off, then if they find a good condition, they travel for free. They have the same energy consumption as are in the ground. And when they're back again on the ground, they consume a lot when they run and when they when they land and so on. So when they fly, it's very energy saving, very efficient. So with this bird, okay, it was we did a lot of different measurements, but I will just show you one funny thing. We are a bit like kids when we are over there. We try many apparatus because it's fun. It's so easy to work with these captive birds. So we put a camera on it just to record the movement and the behavior. But if you ever dream to be a vulture, that's a good day. This is it. Being a vulture for 2 minutes. It's bird ready to fly. It's released. Okay, it's a film on 3 or 4 different flights. So it take off. View from the back. You can see the tail. You can see the wing beats. This is a view from the side. You can see the wing beats. So lots of wing beat in the start. Okay, it departs and it goes to the canyon. And so he has to find the good thermals, and when he finds it, okay, time to turn. It's time to turn, to climb slowly but surely. Nice view from up there. And sometimes it's not so easy. They have to find their way in the canyon. They are completely free. So they have 2 ways to return to their trainers, or to find the thermal and come by the air, or land and go by foot. But they don't like this one. So it's a very nice city, Rocamadour, very touristic on the Compostelle Trailway. And if you go there, you have the chance to see vultures, but also condors, eagles, and so on. And you can see the wingtip here pointing. They soar slowly, and it's marvelous to see them. Well, this day it was not very good condition. It was struggling to find a thermal. And it's followed by another one who has the same problem, but finally he managed. Okay, he goes up, you see the head. It's hard to see the head on the vulture, it's always below the shoulders. So it turns around. Sometimes it has some visits by some fellows, like the jackdaws, fly with them. And okay, this one again very high then, 1,000 meters. They can climb to 1,000 meters in a few minutes if the conditions are good, like the natural birds, like the wild ones. And then they come back with a bald eagle behind. They are called by the trainers, so they are aiming here. And the trainer calls him, and he's back. And this is a view from the trainer. Here it is. Here's our gift. So, what else? Okay. I'm just going to, I will skip this one and go to the last one that mostly interests you. So we have a lot of collaboration. One of them, I'm very proud of it, is with Ran Natan and Or Spiegel that is here, and Roy Harel from Hebrew University of Jerusalem. They are studying vultures. They are doing a fantastic job as well here on the foraging ecology of vultures. And I was really honored when Ran proposed to write a paper together and do a study together to compare the vulture behavior between France and Israel. So in Israel there was 19 birds tracked with high resolution with 1 GPS fix per second, and we have the same amount of data for 8 birds in the coast with very intensive recording at that time. You see the landscape is a bit yellow in Israel and a bit green in France. And we look at the risk for birds for flying, and as pilot I think you can understand this. Especially if you glide, you have 2 solutions to glide. You have different speed, you can adjust your speed. You can choose to flying fast, and then if you fly fast like this red one, after you have finished your thermal, you can go fast, so you save time, but also you descend faster. And the risk for you is to, I can't find the next thermal, so you hit the ground, or you flap in the end to find the thermal and soar again. Or you can go on the safe side, fly slow, and your descent is slower, and you increase your risk to find a new thermal and to climb again. So basically you save energy. So it's a trade-off in three dimensions actually. Not only the time and energy, but also the risk for the bird to land not where it wants. So we look at only one part of the paper. We look at the foraging flight in the home range, from the start at the nest or the roost to the food item, the carcass. So at the beginning, the bird starts from his nest, and it's an unknown destination. It doesn't know where to go because the food is unpredictable. It doesn't know where is the next carcass. So we predict that these guys would go slow and maybe to save energy and to prevent not to make too much risk in that case. But when they found it and they feed, and there's a chick to feed at the nest, then probably they will try to go faster, take more risk, because they know where they go, and so they can find the best way to go to the nest. And what we found is that that's what we did actually. So the altitude is a bit higher in Israel. Probably the thermal is much stronger here than in France, but the climb rate in average is about the same. The glide, the speed when they glide is about the same. The Israeli bird go a bit further and cover more distance per day compared to the French one. Probably in the Negev desert there are less food than in our place in France. But so they are fairly similar behavior besides the distance. And if you look now, we compare the two trips. So if you compare the foraging trip from out of the nest to the return trip, so when you depart for foraging, they cover more distance than when they come back. They fly slower when they go for foraging. They take less risks, but they do more flapping. This is what we expected. So they consume more energy, but perhaps that's because they are landing and so on. And the altitude is about the same. So there is no sex effect. No, the breeders take more risks than the non-breeders, and little effect of the environmental conditions. They do what they want actually. So in discussion, what was remarkable that they do the same thing in the two populations, very similar decision in the two populations of vulture in very different habitat, different context. And so when they go to search for food, they fly at lower altitude, probably to facilitate their search to find carcasses. They take less risks, they travel more distance to the unknown destination, and they flap a bit more, probably because they may take off and land more often. And then when they return, they are direct, they want to gain time to feed the chick, they know where they go, and they are more efficient. I'm finished. So, as a conclusion, we've reintroduced 3 species of vulture in France. I think it's an exemplary success after almost disappearance in the 1960s. And this success is really not due to me, is only the last part of the chain. It's mostly due to the naturalists, to the farmers, and that interact together with administration, and to restore this ancestral relationship between farmers and vultures. And I just want to say to finish that the vultures are really beautiful birds, almost as beautiful as the barn owl. And now you are convinced, I'm sure. They are marvelous vectors for nature conservation, and they can even promote ecotourism. But ironically, the species that was doing the best in the 1960s now is in severe decline everywhere. So we need to work more on this poor little Egyptian vulture. Thank you very much to welcome me here.